let's take a look at the chemical cycling in ecosystems. That chemical cycling is very important because it allows living organisms to obtain nutrients, to obtain minerals, to obtain components that are essential to maintain life. Now, that chemical cycling in ecosystems involve both living things and non-living things, right? So that we call that chemical cycling bio for life, geo for earth. Chemical cycling. So the cycling of chemicals through living systems and the earth, right? Biogeochemical cycling, right? That biogeochemical cycling is going to be sedimentary or gaseous. In other words, as the chemicals are cycled in an ecosystem, they can be cycled through sediments, they can be cycled through gas. If you consider, for instance, carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide is produced by human when we do cellular respiration, right? We are going to deposit out of our body carbon dioxide that goes in the atmosphere, right? That carbon dioxide is going to be used by plants through photosynthesis. So we go the atmosphere and the plants and the human and so on and so forth, right? So now, looking at this slide, we actually see here how the biogeochemical cycle occurs in our ecosystems. Typically, we are going to have a reservoir. That reservoir can be fossil fuel, can be rocks that is going to contain minerals, can be sediments in the ocean. Now, in the natural way of chemical cycling, from the reservoir, the chemicals are going to be put in the exchange pool. That exchange pool can be the atmosphere, it can be the soil, it can be water, right? That exchange pool, it's really where the chemicals are going to be obtained for living organisms to enjoy, right? So now these chemicals from the exchange pool are going to go in living communities. And there the consumers are going to obtain what they need to obtain. The producers are going to obtain what they need to obtain. And the decomposers are also going to be involved in the cycling of these chemicals. Eventually, these chemicals are going to go backwards. So they're going to go from living components to the exchange pool here, and from the exchange pool to the reservoir. All right? Now, with that being said, with human impact, or human activity, I should say, well, the cycling of chemicals can be affected. We can actually put the chemicals from the reservoir directly to the exchange pool, so no problem. And from the exchange pool to the communities, living communities, no problem, right? But what is interesting is that we also bypass the exchange pool. So we take the chemicals from the reservoir directly to the living community, bypassing the natural process. And when that happens, what happens is that we end up putting in the environment more than the environment can handle. Remember, in an ecosystem, you have communities in which different species are interacting with each other, right? One can be a decomposer, the other one is going to be a producer, the other one is going to be a consumer, right? So, like that, the communities are kept in balance and the environment itself is kept in balance, right? Because a bird can only eat so much. A deer can only eat so much. You know, deers do not have freezers, right? Now, they may save some food here and there, or birds can save some food here and there, but they have nothing like what we do, where we have storages that can feed us three months out, right? So without seeking food for 3 months, we can have enough storage of food in our houses, in our storages for many months, which actually is unusual when you consider ecology, right? So the first cycle we are going to address is the phosphorus cycle. In the phosphorus cycle, we are going to take a look at one, natural events, and two, human activities. Now, natural events, we have that. In terms of natural events, we have that the phosphorus is embedded in rocks. These rocks are sedimentary rocks, right? These rocks are going to be weathered, right? So under the effect of the weather, the rocks are going to break down and the minerals are going to be run off in the streams and rivers and seas, and eventually that phosphorus in the rivers is going to eventually go in the soil, right? Make up the soil, and that phosphorus is going to go in solution in the water used by living organisms, right? Some of it goes in forming sediments, and in here on Earth, we're going to have in the biotic community, the minerals are now going to be used by plants, then the consumers are going to get these minerals, and the decomposers are going to get these minerals. Eventually, these minerals are going to go back in forming the sediments, and from the sediments, they're going to make up rocks, right? And it's going to be stored again, okay? But with human activity, including the mining of phosphate, right? The production of fertilizers, the sewage treatment plants, we are releasing an amount of phosphorus that is not naturally occurring, right? Well, not naturally occurring, that's not what I should say. What I should say is that the amount of it, it's more than Mother Nature is actually naturally producing, so that we have an excess phosphorus in the environment. That excess phosphorus end up enriching the soil more than we need, enriching the water more than the water needs, so that this is going to create a community, an ecosystem that is going to be out of balance, right? Okay. Now, what is the importance of phosphorus? Actually, in this slide, we have this small mammal. This small mammal actually relies on phosphorus and calcium for growth. What we notice with this small mammal is that every 4 years, there is grass and sedges are going to be abundantly rich in phosphorus and calcium. By being abundantly rich in phosphorus and calcium, what happens is that the reproductive cycle of this mammal becomes so important that the population explodes, right? When the population of lemmings explodes, this is going to be the sign that the grass they eat actually contains much more phosphorus and mineral than normal, which actually is going to cause overpopulation, right? That overpopulation is going to have many other impacts, right? Now, there are two things to actually remember here. One, it's that phosphorus and calcium are very good and important for the lemmings, but at the same time, overproduction of phosphorus or over release of phosphorus and calcium can be a problem, because while this is good for the growth of this organism, but over reproduction is going to lead to over exploitation of resources, right? Shelter and so on. So we're going to have some competition that we will have to deal with here, which is a problem, right? Which means that we have to be cautious of the transfer rate of minerals from the ground to availability in the pool of minerals that is available for the lemmings, right? So the transfer rate is the amount of nutrients that move from one component of the environment to another component of the environment at a very specific time, right? Human activity is interfering with that transfer rate, right? When we do mining, we are bringing out sediments, right? We are accelerating the weathering, right? So that we're going to have a bunch of fertilizers, because we like, growing plants. So we have a bunch of phosphate that make up fertilizers, the animal feed supplements, the detergents, right? The animal waste from the livestock that we grow, the chicken, the turkey, the cows, the sheep, and so on. The lawn fertilizers, the sewage, all of that is going to cause an excess of phosphate. That phosphate is going to be found in the soil and in the water, all right? And as this phosphorus is found in the soil and in the water, eventually we are going to see a phenomenon that we call eutrophication. The eutrophication is basically an over-enrichment of ponds, lakes, rivers, seas, so that these areas where you have an over-enrichment of phosphorus in this water, for instance, in a lake, we're going to see an overgrowth of algae, right? That overgrowth of algae is going to cause a depletion of oxygen in the water. That depletion of oxygen in the water is going to cause fish to die, because fish need oxygen to thrive, right? Without that oxygen, well, forget about, sustainability. Now, we talked about the phosphorus cycle. How about the nitrogen cycle? In the nitrogen cycle, the storage of nitrogen is in the atmosphere, right? This is where nitrogen is going to be stored. Nitrogen gas, actually, plants do not know how to use nitrogen gas. Animals do not know how to use nitrogen gas. Fungi do not know how to use nitrogen gas. Now, there is one organism that knows how to use nitrogen gas. It's the bacteria. The bacteria, specifically the nitrogen fixing bacteria, are going to actually trap nitrogen gas and convert that nitrogen gas into nitrate and nitrite, right? So the nitrogen fixing bacteria convert nitrogen gas into ammonia, into nitrate and into nitrite, right? This nitrate and nitrite and ammonia are the source of nitrogen to make nucleic acids and to make proteins, right? So that the plant can thrive, and as the plant thrive, the plants are now going to be source of food for other organisms. Eventually, nitrogen is released in the atmosphere via some bacteria that are called denitrifying bacteria. These denitrifying bacteria, after denitrification, are going to cause nitrogen to go back in the atmosphere. However, with human activity, it is possible to take nitrogen gas directly from the atmosphere to the soil in a form that the plant can directly use. Because we can do that, and actually this is how we make fertilizers, we can actually fertilize a lot the soil. And when we fertilize a lot the soil, what happens is that the plants obviously are going to grow, but we are going to have way too much excess of nitrogen compound in the soil, so that the denitrifying bacteria are not going to be anywhere near enough to make that nitrogen back to the atmosphere, so that that nitrogen is going to linger around. Just like with phosphorus, we're going to have eutrophication, causing overgrowth of some organisms in aquatic environment, which is a major issue. Now, I have to say that when it comes to fixing nitrogen gas, the nitrogen fixing bacteria, not only are they in the soil, they also form some association, symbiotic association with some plants, okay? So we can see some nodules here. These nodules are actually where the nitrifying bacteria are going to be found, okay? This allows these plants to produce source of food that is particularly rich in nitrogen. How about the carbon cycle? The reservoir of the carbon, it's basically the fossil fuel, right? The sediments, but also the atmosphere. Actually, the air, the exchange pool is the atmosphere, right? So naturally, the carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere is going to be used by producers to make organic compounds, and eventually these producers are going to be now source of food for consumers, right? Eventually, that carbon dioxide in the water is going to undergo a cycle, which is that carbon dioxide is going to combine with water to form carbonic acid. That carbonic acid is going to split in bicarbonate. That bicarbonate actually is going to be very important as a buffer, right? So in oceans and rivers, well, this bicarbonate is going to be good for the environment, right? The living organisms in the community. And eventually, carbon dioxide is going to return back to the atmosphere through the process of cellular respiration, right? Because in cellular respiration, organisms that do cellular respiration are going to break down the chemicals they obtain from the food, and in presence of oxygen, carbon dioxide is going to be released. However, with human activity, when we exploit fossil fuel, we we burn that fossil fuel, and we end up releasing a huge amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So much that in the water, for instance, the carbonic acid is going to split into bicarbonate, so that we have bicarbonate, but also another compound, another chemical, that is hydrogen ion. That hydrogen ion, in large amount, is going to cause the water to become acidic. That acidity of water is going to be responsible for the breakdown of the exoskeleton of many organisms, including crabs, shrimps, lobsters, and many other organisms that actually use an exoskeleton, right? And that live in the water. So that is a major problem. So many organisms are victim of the effect of human activity, right? So living and dead organisms contain carbon-based molecules, right? This is the reason why we're going to find carbon-based molecule in the reservoir that is deep in the ground, and the exchange pool, right? The fossil fuel, it's basically dead plants that did not get the chance to decompose, right? And also animals that did not get the chance to decompose either, right? This is what makes fossil fuel, right? Fossil fuel, it's was produced about between 286 and 360 millions of years ago. So it took all that time to produce all the fossil fuel that we are exploiting. Now, the amount of carbon dioxide we are putting out, the amount of carbon dioxide that is being absorbed, is it anywhere near what it needs to actually deplete carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? That's one. Two, the one that is absorbed, is it absorbed in a way that it's going to go back into the sediments just the way it was? How long is it going to take? These are just some questions that are good to have, so that we always have to think about the transfer rate, right? When that transfer rate is out of balance, then we have an issue with excess carbon dioxide. I told you about greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is very much a greenhouse gases. I also told you about acidity of oceans and rivers because of too much carbon dioxide in the water, with the carbonic acid that splits into bicarbonate and hydrogen ion. That hydrogen ion causes the water to become acidic, which is a problem, right? So here we have an association between the increase in carbon dioxide, right, and the increase in temperature. So at the beginning of the chapter, in the word of introduction, I told you about the increase in the global temperature between year 1981 and the year 2010. So what was recorded was a global increase in temperature, and that global increase in temperature actually matches the increase in the amount of carbon dioxide. So we do see that there is an increase in the temperature over time. So we can see here from 1980s till 2010, a constant global increase in the temperature, both on land and in oceans. So now we've talked about the ecosystems and the cycling of chemicals. At this point, let's talk about the major ecosystems on Earth. Now, let me first of all say that all ecosystem on Earth fall under the umbrella of biosphere. That biosphere is going to encompass all major ecosystems. Now, there are two major ecosystems. We have aquatic ecosystems and terrestrial ecosystems. Aquatic ecosystems are going to fall into two groups. We have the marine ecosystem, where we have salt water, and freshwater ecosystem, where obviously we don't have fresh salt in the water. Now, with that being said, there are some regions in aquatic ecosystems that are called estuaries. Estuaries, it's basically where fresh water is going to meet oceans or seas, right? So right here, it's an estuary, right? We have an ocean here. We have fresh water coming from the land here, right? And these areas, typically you're going to have tide, right? So water going up and coming down. These estuaries are going to be places where biomass is going to be very abundant. Why? Because many organisms come in these estuaries to reproduce, to look for food, actually mainly to look for food, right? Because this area is very rich with minerals that come from the land, right? With many components that come from the land, but also with some salt that come from the sea, so that this area is just going to be ideal for breeding, for feeding, and thriving, just simply put. Okay, so in the major aquatic ecosystems, we're going to have oceans, and in oceans, we're going to have the photic zone, which is the zone where light is penetrating, and we're going to have the aphotic zone, which is the place of the ocean where light is not going to reach, right? We're going to have coral reefs. These are some other ecosystems. We're going to have estuaries, and we're going to have freshwater. In the freshwater, boy, you have different kind. You're going to have lakes, rivers. You're going to have streams. You're going to have what do you call that? I mean, you're going to have a wide varieties of freshwater ecosystems, but we don't have the time to dive into all these different types of ecosystems. And then the terrestrial biomes. The terrestrial ecosystems are going to constitute biomes. Now, here is one thing I want you to remember about biomes. When it comes to biomes, to determine a biome, you have to take into account two things. The climate that is actually, okay, let me rephrase this. When it comes to biome, there are two very important aspects that come into account when it comes to defining the type of biome. You have the temperatures and the amount of waterfall. These two elements, temperature and amount of waterfall, is going to determine the kind of biome in the terrestrial environment you are going to find. So that there are multiple type of biomes depending of where on the globe one is located, right? The communities are going to be adapted to thrive in a particular climate, okay? So here you are shown basically different amount of precipitation and different amount of temperature. So as we go, well, actually, this is the arrow should not go up. The arrow should go down. So because we are going from cold temperature to warm temperatures, and we are going from low precipitation to high precipitation here. Now, let's take a look at the different biomes. The first biome that we are going to take a look at is the tundra. Notice that in the tundra, the precipitation is very limited. The precipitation is very limited and the temperatures are very cold. In these areas, you're not going to have much vegetation. If you don't have much vegetation, that means you're not going to have many animals living there. In other words, biodiversity is going to be extremely limited in this environment. It's actually what we call a cold desert. A tundra, it's a cold desert. That cold desert, it's because of the scarcity of water. That scarcity of water, it's because water is frozen. We actually have in this area what we call the permafrost. Okay, permafrost. Let me write it for you. Permafrost means that in certain depth of the ground, you are going to have water that is frozen all the time, which is going to limit the ability for some plants to grow. That's why it's actually a cold desert. Now, let's move on. If the precipitation increases a little bit, and then we have the temperatures that go up a little bit, now we are going to go to taigas. In taigas, this is where we are going to find, trees, forests that are going to be coniferous forests. This coniferous forests obviously are going to be dominated by coniferous trees, including pine trees, right? It is cold in here. You don't have a lot of broad leaf trees in here. No, it's going to be very limited, right? Because of the scarcity of water. But yet, you have water that is available. That's why you're going to be able to grow trees in the taiga, right? The temperate deciduous forests are the type of forest that you find in Ohio, okay? In Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Connecticut. These are the kind of forests that you're going to find in the west. I mean, in the East Coast in the United States and in the Middle West in the United States. This temperate deciduous forest, we call them deciduous forest because in some part of the year, the plants, the trees have leaves. So in the spring and the summer, the trees are going to have leaves. In the fall and winter, the trees are going to lose their leaves, right? So we have a clear cut there with two seasons, right? Seasons where you have leaves, they are green, and seasons where you lose leaves, or they are not green, right? So these are the deciduous temperate forest. This occur in Ohio. Then we have the temperate rainforest, where the temperatures are going to be similar to temperate deciduous forest, but the precipitations are going to be much higher, okay? For instance, in Florida, okay? In Florida, you're going to have nice temperate forests there that are going to grow palm trees and things like that. And then we're going to have, for very warm temperature and relatively high precipitation, we're going to have tropical seasonal forest, and followed by tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforest have high temperatures, high rainfall, which means that the conditions are ideal for life to thrive. Okay, because of that, here in these areas, trees are going to be green almost all year long. Okay, these are evergreen areas of the world and with a lot of biomass. Okay, and this is going to just be places where life is going to thrive abundantly. Okay, so the major terrestrial ecosystems, I already told you the tundra are going to occur here in the cold areas, right? Then we are going to have the tigers in the mild cold areas, right? Then we're going to have the temperate deciduous forest, okay? Then we are going to have the tropical, okay? The tropical forest, tropical areas, and you have the equatorial areas where actually it's even better than tropical because it's on the equator line. So you see how green these areas are, right? On the equator, you see how green they are, okay? The desert obviously are going to occur in the tropics, right? The desert are going to occur in the tropics and some other places away from the tropics, but the desert are going to be characterized by the fact that temperatures are high, rainfalls are very reduced. So desert are similar to tundra in a sense that water is scarce. However, the difference between tundra and desert is that deserts are hot, tundras are cold. In both situations, water is not there. One, in tundra, water is frozen. In the desert, water is just evaporated, right? So, the terrestrial biomes, we have the tundra occur in the northernmost part of the globe, right? We're going to have permafrost there, so no big trees. The taiga, they are going to occur in places that are very cold. The coniferous forests are going to dominate these areas. The temperate grasslands, we're going to have rainfalls, but less than in other temperate areas, right? Less than in temperate forest. The trees are going to lose their leaves during winter. That's why we call them deciduous temperate forest, okay? And then we are going to have the desert. In the desert, we're going to have no major trees. We're going to have a lot of shrub, right? Water is going to be scarce. Temperatures are going to be high, okay? Because water is going to be scarce because there is high temperature, so evaporation is there. The savannas, we're going to have the tropical grasslands that are called, actually, I almost said something wrong. The prairies occur in temperate areas. The temperate grassland are also called prairies. The savannas occur in the tropical areas where we're going to have the savannas, the tropical grasslands, right? And the tropical rainforests, this occur in the equator, high temperature, high waterfall, and dominated by large evergreen trees and broadleaf trees. Okay, when it comes to productivity of the biomass, by far the region that produces the most biomass is going to be the estuary, swamps, and marshes, right? This is where you have the highest biomass, while you have the lowest biomass is going to be produced in the desert, okay? In between, we're going to have temperate deciduous forests, okay, that produce a fairly high amount compared to the desert, right? Look at the tundra, very low amount of biomass. but by far, estuaries, swamps, marshes, the tropical rainforest, and the coral reefs are the one that are going to produce the highest amount of biomass. And finally, as we conclude this chapter, very important to remember to review the chapter, go at the end of the chapter and design some reviews, right? You can design some handwritten notes, all right? Concept maps, right? Test yourself for understanding by actually designing your own questions or doing the questions at the end of the chapter, or do both. It doesn't hurt. Okay. So thank you for your attention. Bye now.